Was the universe created by the Big Bang?
How do Christians defend the biblical view of creation of the universe over the secular view?
The Heavens Declare, today on Creation Magazine Live.
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. On this show, we're summarizing the kind of information that you can get in Creation Magazine.
That's right, and today we're going to be talking about cosmology, things in outer space.
And astronomy and space and the solar system and the Big Bang and all that kind of good stuff, yes.
So I thought it'd be appropriate to start with this verse. This is Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims His handiwork. And
it certainly does. I mean, anybody who's ever looked through a telescope, even one time, if somebody sets up a telescope in a backyard somewhere, right, that verse certainly comes to mind.
Exactly. And of course, on the other end of the scale, for those who are not believers, they have to have a way to explain the cosmos and all that stuff too. So of course, the Big Bang, you know, when I'm out speaking, and I'm sure yourself, people have questions about that. How do we explain these things that secular astronomers are saying? Especially versus the biblical time scale, of course.
That's right, yeah. The time scale, of course, we've been talking on these programs about a 6,000-year-old creation,
right,
a 6,000-year-old Earth. We're gonna throw a wrench into that a little bit on this program.
Yeah.
The Earth is 6,000 years old, although galaxies far, far away may be millions of years old.
Right.
You'll need to stay tuned, and we'll try and explain that. We'll summarize that anyway.
Right. How do you figure that out? Right?
But one of the problems is, if those galaxies really are that far away, and this is a huge question that's out there.
Huge one, yeah.
I've heard people say about this question, they consider it impossible for creationists, for Christians to come up with an answer for this. Therefore, the Bible must be wrong, so they reject Christ because of this question.
Right.
And the question is, how come we're seeing the light from those galaxies that are hundreds of millions of light years away?
Exactly.
If the universe is only 6,000 years old.
Right. And this is a question I get most of the time when I do a Q&A session at a church.
It's very popular, yeah.
So we're going to look into those things. We're going to have a guest, another one of the Canadian speakers on today to help us with that, and we'll be right back.
Normally, when an animal dies, it decays quickly. The skin decays and the bones fall apart or disarticulate. Finding fossilized soft tissue, such as skin, implies very rapid burial before it decayed. Describing a duck-billed dinosaur unearthed in South Dakota, one researcher said, "You can see the individual scales. Because of the presence of skin and the complete articulation of the animal, it was obviously not killed and it was obviously not scavenged." A worldwide flood would rapidly bury animals, and rapidly buried animals, not buried slowly, are exactly what we see in the fossil record.
Creation Ministries International staff, many from a wide variety of scientific disciplines, have produced thousands of articles now available in a massive online database. Creation.com has grown to become the world's most powerful internet resource on the creation evolution issue. There are more than 6,500 articles already online, and new articles are added daily. Some of the topics covered include the feasibility of Noah's Ark and evidence for a global flood, the age of the Earth from both the Bible and science, scientific arguments against the Big Bang and models that explain observations in astronomy within a young Earth time frame, recent discoveries that support dinosaurs fitting with biblical history, evidence from biology that shows that the type of change that is observed in living things has absolutely nothing to do with evolution, and many more topics. These thousands of articles are available for free 24 hours a day to anyone on Earth with an internet connection. Genesis is one of the most attacked areas of the Bible. Creation.com provides logical, scientifically accurate counterattacks in this area. As 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5 says, "We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God." Got questions? Get answers at creation.com.
Have you ever heard that your appendix is a useless vestigial organ left over from your evolutionary past? At one time, evolutionists believed there were more than 180 functionless structures in the human body. Today, virtually none. Even up to 2002, some dictionaries defined vestigial as relating to a body part that has become small and lost its use because of evolutionary change. Today, the appendix is recognized as a special part of our immune system.
Now, this show's on astronomy, and we have Dr. Emil Silvestro here. Of course, your PhD is in geology, not astronomy, and yet your first love was astronomy, wasn't it?
It still is the second love now, of course. It has evolved down to the second love. But you see, astronomy is a profound topic. And when we discuss the issue of the beginnings of the entire universe, you have to start with some basic rules. And one of them is, can we really, as human beings, investigate the beginnings? I'm talking about the beginning of space-time. Well, you see, humans are limited in their investigation of facts by natural laws. We cannot study the universe without natural laws, right? We don't understand it. Question is, were those natural laws there when the beginning happened? No. When God created, He didn't use the natural laws. He basically used whatever He used, we don't know, but not natural
They're
laws.
supernatural laws. It's a
There you go.
miraculous event, absolutely
Precisely.
outside the realm of science. Right.
God
Yep.
was not limited by the natural laws. Actually, natural laws are the result of creation. They came into existence once creation was in place.
Right.
Therefore, we humans cannot really understand those times. The time before natural laws are not investigable to us.
So what
we
you're
can't
saying
approach
is,
them.
until you get to the end of the creation week,
Exactly.
you can't really...
You have no ways to investigate it.
Right. Yeah.
After that, it's a different story. And it's interesting that the Big Bang model begins with a supernatural moment. Before Planck's time, and I'm going to explain what the Planck's time is, they said it was only one force. So you cannot explain a universe with one force. That's a good definition of supernatural.
So there are similarities here then between, we believe in the miraculous,
Yeah.
and to some extent, so do the Big Bangers.
Scientific miraculous.
Before yes.
Okay. Now, see, Dr. Arthur Smith, for example, from the University of Ohio, admits that we have no means to investigate times after Planck's time in terms of energy. It's just we don't have the tools for it. And it's very interesting if you think about this, because what Planck's time is, essentially, is 10 to minus 43 of a second. So it's a second divided by 10 followed by 43 zeros after the initial explosion. So after that time, we can still not interpret because we don't have the tools. Now we say we're building a super tool, right? The LHC, the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Well, let's have a look at it. You see, at its maximum power, it will achieve 7 tera electron volts for protons. But in order to investigate times after Planck's time, in the beginnings of the universe, we need levels of energy up to 10 to the 16th power tera electron volts. So there you go. We have no means.
There's no comparison between this Large Hadron Collider and what the secular cosmology...
We can reach that level of energy, so if you can't reach it, how can you prove it?
Right.
You know, it's an experimental model that has to be proven, but we don't have the tools to do it. Why? Because it's beyond our capabilities.
Yeah.
And in final analysis, here's something very interesting coming from Professor Paul Davies, who's not a creationist, neither is he a Christian, but he admits that we cannot have, and look, it's a beautiful quote, but in the end, a rational explanation of the world in the sense of a closed and complete set of logical truth is almost certainly impossible. We are barred from ultimate knowledge, he says, from ultimate explanation by the very rules of reasoning that prompt us to seek such explanation in the first place. If we wish to progress beyond, we have to embrace a different concept of understanding from that of rational explanation. I wonder what that would be.
Wow.
It's revealed information coming from the very author of all that information and of creation itself. So in final analysis, there's our limit. You know,
Well, that's an interesting quote, because from that of rational explanation, I mean, I've talked to people and they say, well, you know, as a Christian, I believe in the supernatural, I believe in miracles. That's irrational. And he's saying that the same thing.
Yeah, well, but see, the whole thing turns around the concept of time. Now, what is time, after all? Do you ever think about this? You know, the Encyclopedia Britannica gives us a definition that means nothing. Time is a measure, a measurable period, a continuum that lacks spatial dimensions. Time is of philosophical interest and is also the subject of mathematical and scientific investigation. What is that? $800 for such a definition? Einstein says time is what the clock measures. Well, clocks don't measure time. It's a mechanical one. It measures the speed of the gears.
Sure.
If it's an electronic one, it measures the oscillation of a crystal. So time is actually movement. And time is defined by movement, and movement is defined by time. Therefore, nothing is defined.
Right.
You know, I remember a classical one, which is time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. That's what Groucho Marx said.
For years, one popular evidence for a recent creation was to argue that the amount of dust on the moon must have accumulated in less than 10,000 years. The claim was based on early estimates of the rate at which dust from space accumulates on the moon's surface. If the moon really is billions of years old, there was concern that the Apollo moonlanders would sink into a deep layer of dust. However, these early estimates were wrong, and by the time of the Apollo landings, NASA was not worried about sinking spacecraft. The new data makes this argument for a young moon invalid.
And we're back, and we're talking about a rather complicated issue, I think, for many people. You know, when you're talking about galaxies so far away and light coming from galaxies so far away and things like that, how do we even determine, how do we even measure distances like that in space?
That's the tricky part. And that's where most of the problems are. So we already saw that time is a convention. We don't really know what it is. How about distance? Do we know what it really is?
Right.
So how do you measure distances? There's a number of ways you can do that in deep space, that is. But you need to keep in mind that the deeper you move into space, the more you're connected to a model of interpreting space. So age, and therefore space and time, are connected to the model of universe that you use, as Professor Lovell said in here. And the other thing is, the time scale is different if the explanation of gravity is different. We don't really know what gravity is. Say it is this, then time means this. Say it is that, then time is a different thing.
Because gravity affects time.
Exactly.
Yes. Right.
So you see, we still haven't settled on the model, but we already measure distances. And there's where the problem is.
Right.
But anyway, if you look at the technicalities of it, one of the first approaches to measure distance is the so-called parallax. So what is a parallax? If you have an object in space and you see it against a constellation which is further away, you will notice that it is in a different position in the winter and in the summer. And the reason for that is because the planet rotates, it goes around the sun, so you see it from different angles. So since you know the diameter of the orbit, which is the basis of the triangle, you know the angle, then you use trigonometry to measure the distance to the object.
Right.
Right. Well, the limit to that is within several thousand light years. You can't go past that. Once you go past that, you have to use different things, like measuring star luminosity. Well, that starts with the assumption you know how much light is produced by that star,
right,
and how much absorbing material is between you and that star. And that's a guesswork. It's not a real technical thing. A more precise way to do this is when you have pulsating stars, so you can quantify the amount of light that comes to you, and that's known as the Cepheids, pulsating stars. And here's a picture of them from the Andromeda galaxy. So there's little beacons in space, and that pace, that pulsing, would tell you actually how much light has traveled. But still, you need to know how much light is produced in there. So again, you're in...
so a tremendous amount of assumptions in
exactly,
all of these distances.
Exactly. And then it's the Type 1 supernovae, which are very, very bright objects in space. Now, this is the most precise calculation of light that we can have from an explosion of a star. And it has various kinds of radiation. It's all modulated radiation, so you can measure that. And I will tell you distance even more precisely. But still, it's based on the same assumption that you know how much light is lost as it travels towards you. Well, the one method that is used, here's another picture to show you some of these Type 1 supernovae. But you see, the final measure is the so-called redshift and Hubble's constant. And I need to explain the redshift because everybody says that, but very, very few understand it. Here it is. As you sit and you hear an object coming, producing sound, say a kid driving a car, it sounds like,
right.
Yeah.
There's a sudden change in the pitch. That is because as it comes towards you, it compresses the sound, so increases the pitch. As it moves away from you, it stretches the wave sounds, therefore it lowers the pitch.
Right.
And that's known as the Doppler effect. Now, if you do the same thing for objects in deep space, you have exactly the same thing, only it happening to light. So, you see in this spectra coming from stars, in the lab, every single chemical element, like hydrogen, has certain positions. But if you look into deep space, you will see that those positions are shifted towards the lower part of the spectrum, lower frequency,
The
which
red,
is red.
yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that means that the object must be moving away from us. And this is the number one way that they came up with this idea of dilation of space. Because any direction in space you look, objects are basically shifted in red. Further they are from us, the redder they look, which means they move faster. So Edwin Hubble in the 1920s has taken this kind of measurements, and he discovered basically all objects in space, with very, very few exceptions, are moving away from us. And the further you look, the higher the redshift, the z, right? Therefore, the faster they move, up to the speed of light, which would be the limit. So here's the universe, keeps growing further and further away.
An expanding universe.
Expanding. Well, that means that in any direction you look, every object that's further than the previous one should have a higher redshift, because it moves faster, and then faster, and then faster. Well, that's the beautiful part of it. That's the theory. But actually, we're going to see that there are serious problems with this. It doesn't match all the time, and that has been a serious challenge to this idea of measuring distance in space. So, other than this method, we have nothing to estimate the distances in space. Actually, Hubble put together a constant formula and is calculating this distances. We'll be back.
When Dr. Carl Whelan started Creation magazine in his home in 1978, little did he realize that today it would reach into some 170 countries all around the world and have such a huge impact in so many lives. This unique 56-page full-color family magazine refutes evolution and gives God the glory for the amazing creation we see around us. Creation magazine is an essential tool for anyone wanting to immunize their family against the anti-biblical worldviews bombarding us from all sides. With no paid advertising, every page in Creation magazine is chock full of powerful articles, ammunition to intelligently discuss nature, history, science, the Bible, and related subjects. Although written for lay people, every effort is made to ensure the content is technically accurate so that even experts are satisfied. And young children look forward to the section written especially for them. Many have come to faith in Christ because of subscribers sharing this magazine with them. So subscribing not only boosts your faith, it enables you to get biblical truth into your community in a special way. Subscribe today and have it delivered to your home every 3 months. Visit creation.com for subscription information or call the CMI office nearest you.
Now, we've talked about redshift and the size of the universe. Now we've just talked about one scenario for explaining those. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes, but creationists, we don't have a real argument saying that the universe is drastically smaller than we're hearing from secular astronomers, but we're going to come back to those topics in a few minutes. Let's talk about the Big Bang.
Well, yeah, interesting. The origin of this is actually almost a slangish thing. It's Fred Hoyle once said, so you mean to say that the universe came into existence from a Big Bang or through a Big Bang? But here's the story. Some would say that nothing exploded into everything, but that's not really so. A singularity, which is a nothing that contains all the mass in the universe, exploded. And
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does, much more. You know, it's a Latin word, so therefore it hides some lack of knowledge, but that doesn't matter. As the space and time is born out of this explosion, it keeps moving further and further and further away. And that's the space being born.
Right.
Now, the distance from the central explosion to what we believe to be the edge of the visible universe is somewhere around 13.5 billion light years. That means light, which travels 300,000 kilometers per second, needs 13.5, maybe 13.7 billion years to get there.
That's the current secular estimate.
Yes.
Right?
So there it is in kilometers, if you're really interested in it. But
It's a big number.
It's a big number. But the thing is, and this is the important part, as you move further away in time, as I said, and space, the redshift increases.
Right.
Which would seem to say that actually the speed increases, right? So you move faster and faster. The redshift shows that the universe is dilated further back in time. On the other hand, further you move from the center, earlier the universe is, the younger it is in its beginning stages. And then the closer you come to us, the universe is the mature universe of today. Well, that's the ideal, that's the beautiful theory. As I said, every single such level in space becomes younger as you move away from us.
Or the light that we're seeing through our telescopes was generated so many billion years ago.
So you see the place as it looked then,
Right.
right? Only that, interestingly enough, this is not the rule always. There are, for example, galaxies that have been found to be 100 million light years away up to 1 billion light years away. And guess what? They are actually massive young galaxies. So these are close to us. Therefore, they should not be in a birth stage. Yet you see galaxies being born close to us.
Okay, so they look young. They look like they just developed?
Exactly, but they should be old. So in other words, you could say basically that the old galaxies, because they're close to us, that's the old universe, are actually too young because they're nascent. And the opposite is also true, like the Francis filament, which was discovered in the southern skies in the Crane constellation. It's a long string of 300 million light years long string of galaxies, mature galaxies, spiraling galaxies, perfectly mature. But they are located at a distance which is incredibly far away in time. It's 10.8 billion years.
So not at all where evolutionists would expect them.
No, you didn't expect to have galaxies there at all, let alone mature galaxies.
Right.
So
Yeah.
in other words, now we have the opposite situations. The young galaxies are too old. So you see, it's beautiful, but we have a serious problem. And the other problem we actually have here, clearly laid out by Professor Glazebrook, is that we have no clue how galaxies turn their dust, their gases, into stars. In other words, we have no clue how stars really form. And we need to find ways to explain that. Yet we use the stars to measure distance, to measure age and all that, but we don't really know how they form.
Lots of assumptions again.
There you go.
Yes.
And all these assumptions are based on the initial assumption that the universe has to have a natural cause. And the best we can come up with is this explosion. Because we see objects moving away. So if they move away, they must have come out of a sort of an explosion that is basically stretching space out. But the problem that we actually see, you start with a beautiful model in the 1920s, keeps developing into a nice structure in the 50s, and now we have high-tech gear. And they all look after confirming that. And the more we look at it, and the deeper we look at it, the more we discover that it's not so.
That the heavens declare the glory of God, not
There
the
you
glory
go.
of some
That is-
singularity.
and
right?
it also declares the limitations of human beings.
Yes.
In other words, that we all fell short of the glory of God. So we can't really understand things. But the truth of the matter is that modern technology does not confirm the Big Bang, rather creates bigger problems. So the Big Bang has to continuously be stretched and reshaped and done in a form that somehow would fit the observations.
So this is complicated stuff. We're moving very quickly. You need to go to the website, creation.com, for a fuller picture of what we're talking about.
If God didn't create the sun until day 4, how could each of the previous 3 days have been real days? Although we are not told what the light source was, the Bible says that God created the earth and light on the first day. Thus, we can deduce that on the first 3 days, the earth was already rotating in space relative to God's created light, enabling a day-night cycle. In the book of Revelation, we read that in the future new heavens and earth there will once again be no need for sun.
Now, we were talking about the Big Bang model, and basically to summarize what you just said, you know, it started off, sounded like a feasible theory. Earlier on, you were mentioning the 1920s, and then further on, we're coming to find that the observations we're making today with the high-tech equipment we have, they're not supporting it. So it's not to say that, you know, when people propose this idea, it wasn't logical. It's kind of like a logical argument, right?
Oh,
if you have
absolutely.
a faulty premise, you can come to a wrong conclusion just because your starting premise ideas were incorrect.
That would be even acceptable. The problem is when you twist the conclusions to fit your model. You know, that's what the big problem is.
Right.
And here's, for example, a situation. Is this a more of a gang attitude? Okay, well, whatever you do, you have to defend your model.
Right.
You know, it's like you cannot allow facts ruin a beautiful theory.
Yes.
So here's the situation of NGC 4319, which is a galaxy. NGC means the New Galactic Catalog. And Markarian 205 is actually a quasi-stellar object, a quasar, far, far away, extremely powerful radiation coming from it.
Right.
Well, if you look at them in the visual, here's a picture of it. You can see the galaxy, which is about 300 million light years away from us, and then the Markarian, the distant object, which is over 1 billion light years away from us. And they're separated. The same thing, it's visible in ultraviolet. But if you analyze that in X-rays, there's a bridge, a material bridge connecting the two. Now, how can you have a material bridge connecting a galaxy 300 million light years away to an object over 1 billion light years away?
Yeah, wait a minute here.
It's a big problem. You can't have this. So the conclusion is that they're not that far away from each other.
So
which
the
means
assumption, the distance assumptions here are
precisely
a problem.
Precisely. And the same thing is happening here. In this case, is another galaxy, and that is about 360 million light years away. Well, inside it, there's another quasar, and guess what? This quasar is no more, no less than 35 billion light years away from it. Wait a minute, that's bigger than the universe itself. So you have a serious problem here.
Right.
And one of the interesting outcomes of this WMAP probe was this image of the universe, which was produced by NASA. That shows how matter is distributed in the universe, and also the temperature of void space.
Temperature of space, yes.
Exactly, the background radiation. Well, this was a shocker, because you look at the picture, the opposing edges of the universe have temperatures almost identical. The difference is 0.004 Kelvin, which
Right.
is nothing. Well, wait a minute. They are situated at such a distance from each other, you know, that there's no way, there's only one way they could have the same temperature, if they kept exchanging heat. Well, that means photons.
So the Big Bang model does not predict that it would be even. It should be
No.
hot spots and cold
No.
spots.
No,
there hasn't been
exactly,
time.
that's how it
But
should
that's not
be.
what we see.
Yes, so keep in mind the distance from the center of that explosion to the edge is 13.5 billion light years.
Right.
So now, if the two opposing edges of the universe communicate, exchange photons to keep even in temperature,
Right.
it means the photons have to travel twice that much, 27 billion
Right.
light years. Well, that's twice the age of the universe. So how can this be? They call this the paradox of all light, because light appears to travel twice as much as the age of the universe itself.
So the Big Bang folks have the same or a similar light travel problem.
Very
that's
serious
always,
problem.
That's we're
So
accused of.
the only way to explain it is to say now that actually the universe expanded much faster than the speed of light, which is what Alan Guth has calculated in the 1980s. That the universe was expanding faster than the speed of light. And there's no problem, millions of times faster than the speed of light. There's no problem there, because the speed of light is the ultimate limit inside space-time, inside the universe.
Right.
But there's no limit at which space-time itself can inflate. So he said, well, it expanded millions of times faster than the speed of light. You mean to say that the universe was stretched out very fast? Aha! So now, it is not that we see the redshift because the object moves away, but space-time itself moves away, objects included.
Okay,
So
so
you ha-
now the redshift may not be a Doppler shift at all, what you explained before.
Exactly.
It may be just the result of the stretching of the wave of light.
Precisely.
Ah.
You see, so if you have a star here producing light, and you suddenly move it millions of times faster than the speed of light, it'll stretch the light, like you stretch a rubber band, and it becomes thinner.
The wavelength, it makes
Therefore,
it longer. Redshift,
exactly.
right, yes.
Well, the word stretch does ring a bell. We find it in the scripture. God stretches the heavens.
About 17 times.
Yes.
Stretches it out or
So,
spreads it out, yeah.
That's not to say that God used the Big Bang to create. I mean, he is much more creative than that. But here you see the Big Bang is showing you that basically the only way to explain what you see is by accepting a time frame which could be the same with the Bible. Because if the universe expanded millions of times faster than the speed of light, it could have easily expanded in 6,000 years.
Right.
And there you go. You have the solution of the
And
problem.
those are some of the models that creationists are thinking of. We're incorporating
Yes,
these ideas
precisely.
into the creation models. And that's it's an exciting time to be a creationist, especially an astronomer. We'll be back.
Starlight, Time, and the New Physics. Written by Dr. John Hartnett, this is a bold new answer to the distant starlight issue. Many still doubt the Bible's clear timescale because they think it's impossible for light to have reached the Earth in only a few thousand years from stars that are millions of light years away. This misconception is often the ultimate stumbling block to a straightforward acceptance of the Bible, even the Gospel itself. Although understandable by intelligent laypersons, it also contains technical equations and papers put into 111 pages of appendices for the specialist as well.
And we're here with the In the News section, and there's never a lack of creation evolution content
Lots of
you can
stuff.
find in the news.
Yeah.
This is an absolutely stunning article that was sent in from a supporter, one of the Canadian supporters, and let's just talk about this. The title of the article in the newspaper was Ottawa rejects motion to favor Darwin theory over other scientific explanations. And it said a Bloc Québécois proposal to recognize Charles Darwin's theory of evolution as the only scientific explanation for the origin of the human species was rejected by Parliament. The Bloc's Pierre Paquette put forward the motion Tuesday in an effort to recognize Darwin's 200th birthday and the 150th anniversary of his seminal work, The Origin of Species. He was seeking unanimous consent for the motion, and then it says the greatest number of naysayers appeared to come from the Conservative bench, while most others answered yes to the motion. So I guess that means there were more Conservatives than others. This, I was...
It's unreal.
Unbelievable. I was thinking about this. Look what the title says. It rejects a motion to favor Darwin's theory. They weren't talking about favoring Darwin's theory.
No,
They're
they weren't.
talking about
Imposing.
a government imposing a scientific explanation. What other area of science would a government proposal ever
It's
come
amazing.
into that?
You know what it sounds like? Emil, you grew up in communist Romania under Ceausescu.
Yeah.
This is Canada. This is supposed to be a free country.
How can a government propose
You cannot
that?
politicize science. How can a politician decide science?
Yes.
Well,
which
let them do the
model
research,
is
then
right
we should
over-
relax.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
The whole proposal of enacting that into law or putting some kind of a law in place is ridiculous to begin with. But just the boldness is shocking.
Well, and it's interesting, you know, it's a very short article. I never came across it until a supporter sent it in.
Yes.
So this was something that was proposed and kind of slipped through, and then nobody really heard about it, or I didn't anyway. But I was just staggered. And then they kind of profile the naysayers. It's very interesting.
naysayers, yeah,
You know, the naysayers, as if we should just all bow down and this
But
should
you realize
just
just by using that expression, naysayer, that's conservatism.
be, of course.
They say no sayers, right?
You know, so things like that. I mean, people really. I think sometimes as we're talking, you know, people say, "Well, creation evolution is it a big deal?"
It's not a big deal.
To me, that
It's foundational.
proposal itself is so indicative of a worldview. Like, I want my worldview foundation made into law,
And we're going to force it on everybody else.
and everybody's going to have to say, "This is the way we came here from you know, goo
But
to
they
you."
have been democratically elected.
And you know, it really does affect the way you think about everything. And we've talked about that on the show. You know, origins, where we come from, did we just evolve, or
Sure.
were we created? Here's another news article. It said President Obama okays funding embryonic stem cell research, but removes adult stem cell funding. Now, again, as Christians, stem cell research, does that have anything to do with the Christian walk? How should we understand that? And
Yes.
we're going to
And
do a
we're
show.
going to do a show on embryonic versus adult stem cells and cloning and genetically modified, all those hot topics. We're going to do
Right.
a whole program on that.
Yeah. So I'll just read a little bit here. It says, earlier this month, President Barack Obama reversed a Bush executive order which limited federal funds for embryonic stem cell research to lines created before the 9th of August. So under Obama's new executive order, federal funding will be available for new embryonic stem cell lines created by the destruction of human embryos. So, of course, this is the real pointy end of the whole program here. You've
Yes.
got to destroy
Yes.
human life, and of course, you know, these.
I mean, biblically, human life begins at conception.
Right.
It's very obvious. It's obvious biologically too. The genes come together. You have a new person created at that point. So you're killing people.
Right.
It's murder.
Now, there's just two different types of stem cell research. So there's adult stem cells and there's embryonic, of course. And what's interesting is the embryonic stem cells, as the article reports, has actually been shown to be quite dangerous in some cases. In the recent case of an Israeli boy who was injected with embryonic stem cells by Russian doctors, it highlights the dangers of treatment with embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cells are pluripotent, which means they are able to change into more types of tissue than adult stem cells, but they're also less stable. In the case of the Israeli boy, the injections caused tumors in his spine and brain. Even U.S. News and World Report, by no means a conservative or Christian stronghold, politically calls embryonic stem cell research obsolete. Now, there's been
Really?
yes,
Wow.
but there have been great successes using adult
Adult
stem cells.
Over 70 major breakthroughs using adult stem cells. Not a single one as at this point with
Right.
with embryonic.
If I may just add something to this. Everybody
Absolutely.
discusses the immorality of destroying life.
Right.
But there's another side to this too. The immorality of creating life only for that purpose.
Yes.
Itself.
Yes.
Yep.
Industrial creation of life, not like the result of a relationship in a couple,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
is inhumane. I mean, totally dehumanizes.
Right.
Now, some people have argued that extra embryos left over in a fertility clinic, they're headed for the trash anyway, so if they're going to be killed in any case, it's better to derive some benefit from them. But those aren't the only possible destinations for extra embryos. There's actually agencies like Snowflake's Frozen Embryo Adoption Program, where they arrange for these embryos to be adopted by infertile people who will have them implanted. Already babies have been adopted in this way. You can actually see some of them on the Snowflake's website.
Wow.
If you go to their website. And their very existence is a reminder that every embryo is already a baby, not simply potential life.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
these are things that I believe Christians really need to think long and hard about, and don't just let some news source or whatever just, adopt a program. We really need to think about these things.
And I mean, there's these types of worldview articles on the website too, creation.com.
Yes.
And you can search on stem cells and cloning and genetically modified foods. What should Christians think about that?
Right.
And as these things relate to origins, of course, that being our focus at CMI.
Yeah.
But some other things that happen in the news, maybe not as heavy as some of these topics, which are obviously very serious. But getting back to astronomy a little bit. And this was a number of years ago. This is not recent news, but in July of 2005, NASA smashed part of a space probe into a comet. The comet's name was Tempel 1. And they did that to try to break pieces off to try to see what the comet is composed out of. And what they found the normal things like silica, a major component of sand, ethane, a gas that's used on Earth as a fuel and a refrigerant. And they also found a couple of others that they were not expecting. They found carbonates. And these are things like they're found in shells of sea creatures and in limestones and clays. But carbonates come from a watery origin. That's what they didn't expect. Water. How could water be way out there in these comets, way out in the solar system? Completely unexpected for the evolutionists. And yet Genesis 1, you read there how God forms everything from water.
Right.
You also read in 2 Peter 3, verses 5 to 7, about things in water and so on. And creationists have made predictions based on the watery origin of the universe for magnetic fields of planets and other things.
And we're getting support for it.
That's right. It's an exciting time to be a creationist.
Supernovas. When a massive star explodes, it is called a supernova. This explosion is so bright that it will briefly outshine the rest of its galaxy. According to physical equations, the supernova remnants should keep expanding for hundreds of thousands of years. If our own galaxy really is billions of years old, we should be able to observe more than 5,000 supernova remnants with a diameter of 300 light years or more, yet we don't see a single one. This is exactly what we would expect if our galaxy was 6,000 to 10,000 years old.
Hubble bubble, Big Bang in trouble. Many still doubt the Bible's clear timescale because they think it is impossible for light to have reached the Earth in only a few thousand years from stars that are millions of light years away. However, contrary to the Big Bang theory's billions of years, we may actually be seeing a 6,000-year-old creation right now. Physicist Dr. Hartnett argues persuasively that quasars are not massive objects at the universe's edge, but embryonic galaxies ejected from mature galaxies in our own neighborhood. This presentation is suitable for high schoolers and adults.
All right, we're talking about astronomy, and I just think it's interesting that you mentioned in a previous segment that the more we learn from science, and the more discoveries we're making with the Hubble Space Telescope and the Spitzer Space Telescope and all these things, the more problems there are for the Big Bang. So, I mean, science is great. The more we learn about the universe, the more it declares the glory of God. We've said that already. What are some of those problems that evolutionists now have to try to fit into their model of origins?
Well, one of the problems that hits actually into the very philosophy of astronomy, because believe it or not, actually astronomy is done by ways of philosophy. Okay, let's remember this representation of space with the increasing distance and all that, the explosion. But the interesting part is that the study of the distribution or this redshift does not vary continuously, but it's quantified. It comes in amounts, which are basically distances. And the further you look into space, there's more and more matter, more and more galaxies. And in between, there's hardly anything.
Right.
So it's mostly like matter is distributed around us like layers on the onion. Well, that's a no-no, because that basically points out to the fact that we might be very close to the center of that layering,
right,
within 1 million light years. Well, that philosophically is a no-no for astronomers. And
yes,
it's interesting that one of the dissidents in the astronomical world is G.F.R. Ellis, who works at the University of Cape Town and is publishing the most with Stephen Hawking. He said, wait a minute, I can construct a spherical universe with the Earth in the center, and you cannot disprove it by way of observations. What we see shows to that.
Yeah.
We only reject it because of philosophical criteria. Mainly, the Earth should not be the center.
We shouldn't be special.
No. There's no special position, even more so.
It's interesting philosophical.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be special.
Yes,
that's what
but the biology, the philosophy behind this, the whole concept of the Big Bang is that the universe is not even a volume, it's a surface of a sphere.
Right.
So there's no center on the surface of a sphere. But guess what? It turns out that if the universe begins with an explosion, further you move away, it should slow down, right? It starts fast when you explode, and then further you move away from that center, everything that started moving fast slows down, right? Wrong. What they came to discover is actually based on this supernova data, that basically the universe, further you go, far faster and faster runs away from us. So instead of slowing down, it accelerates. Well, wait a minute, that's against the model. If you start an explosion, it just slows down until it stops. No, it moves faster and faster and faster. And in order to save that orthodoxy, they had to introduce this concept, believe it or not, of dark matter and dark energy. So the universe is made, essentially, of 90% dark matter, which we don't know what it is. We don't know the properties.
And we can't see it.
You can't see it.
Never
And
observed it.
Controlled by dark energy. Well, isn't that interesting? I think next one is going to be Darth Vader in here. Basically, they're simply accepting the impossible just to save their model.
Like
so they have to invent these things that nobody's observed and we can't measure
to save the
save
model.
the Big Bang
You can't
model.
quantify it in any way.
Well, G.F.R. Ellis took a different approach. Let's break the orthodoxy. Let's say that the universe is actually the Earth is in the center of the universe. He says we're in the middle of a bubble here. And within that bubble, which is almost void, it's just several gazillion galaxies, about a billion light years from us. But then you move further away, there's more and more and more galaxies. But because of that bubble, we see this radiation coming differently. Well, that goes against the very heart, which is the Copernican principle. The idea coming from Copernicus that the Earth is not the center of the solar system, and by extrapolation, nothing is the center of nothing in the universe.
Right.
Right? And he says, well, wait a minute. We look at the supernova data, and we come out with something unphysical. If we keep the Copernican model, how about then questioning the Copernican model itself? That actually we are in a center. And he says, you don't like it, doesn't matter. We live in an improbable universe. So then suddenly, now we have this admission from astronomers that we even willing to accept a Big Bang model in which there is a center, and that we are the center. Right. Well, the Bible is clear about that. When I consider thy heavens, what is man that you'll be mindful of him, says Psalm 8. So it is God who speaks to this space, laid around us to prove his grandeur and his beauty. And that definitely refuses secularists like Carl Sagan, who said the delusion that we have some privileged position in the cosmos.
Yes.
Well, I guess Carl Sagan now has a different view because he died, so he can see eternity in a different way.
And we'll be back.
The term apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, meaning defense. It refers to the type of defense given in a court of law. Christian apologetics is the reasoned defense of the Christian faith against objections. The Apostle Paul said, "We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God." 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5. Christians today need to study apologetics as we love the Lord with our mind as well as our heart.
generally creationists are accused of only criticizing others but never creating something instead to
Right.
replace the model.
Yes.
That's not correct. Even with this very difficult topic, actually creationist alternatives exist. And this is what we call creationist cosmology. But they're all moving around or gravitating, if you wish, around the same idea. Space and time are not fixed.
Right.
They can dilate,
Right.
they can contract, contract. So therefore, if you can put together a scientific explanation showing that at some point in time unfolded at a different pace,
Right.
and then space did expand faster, then you can put your numbers
Yeah.
together.
And of course, relativity, Einstein's relativity, he suggested that both speed and gravity affect time.
By all
Right.
means.
And this concept, I always mention in my talks that I'm talking about there's a difference between observable science and theoretical in the past explanations and things. And the concept that time does not travel at the same pace throughout the universe is reflected in our modern technology
Yeah.
like our GPS
It's a little hard
system.
to grasp, but it's a fact.
Yes.
Right.
It's a measurable fact.
Yes.
For example, when you've got your GPS system and you're pinging information up to this array of satellites up there, it's 20,000 kilometers up. The clocks on those satellites, so to speak, are running at a faster pace than the ones on Earth. And not only that, but the satellites are moving at a tremendous velocity, 12,000 kilometers per hour. If you don't take those things into account, they estimate you'd be off course by about 400 meters per hour if you didn't take into account time dilation and velocity. So this is real science. It's
Yes,
observable
yes.
science and taken into account today. So.
Well, you see, the place where space and time is bent, literally to infinity, is what they call a black hole. A black hole is such a heavy object that will bend space and time to infinity. Just to visualize this, imagine a two-dimensional world, a sheet of rubber made of thin rubber, yeah? And you put the various objects on it, heavier, lighter, and you look from the side, and each one would create a dimple.
Right.
The dimple is deeper as the object is heavier. Or the object is heavy enough, it's going to eventually break that. Or
So a
bend it to
massive
infinity.
distortion of space.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, add time to that, you have the
And
four
time,
dimensions,
right.
and that's what happens around the black hole. And that place is called the event horizon. Now imagine the opposite of the white hole, which consumes everything. A black hole, excuse me. And you'll have a white hole,
Which spits everything out.
Exactly,
Yeah.
including the event horizon. So the event horizon, instead of shrinking, moves away, further away.
Right.
Now, if the universe started like that, says Dr. Ross Humphreys in his model, for example, then what happens is you have an expanding event horizon, and with it, there's an interesting thing. If the Earth is in the center of the universe, as we already saw,
Right.
then the distance from that center to the edge of the event horizon, in their time, means 24 hours. And it is 24 hours. But once you pass the event horizon, it becomes millions or billions of years. Because you have this curvature of space-time, which tends to infinity. Right? So now, your observations are confirmed by what you see there.
Right.
And that's essentially the white hole cosmology, which was created in the 1980s and is now still a valid model. Another model, more recent, based on Dr. John Hartnett's
Yes.
work, starts with the cosmic relativity equations of an Israeli mathematician, Moshe Carmeli, in which the essential thing is that time itself dilates. So it's not that space is curved, just the curvature of space and time, but it's the fact that time flows at different paces at different positions in space. And that's why, basically, you can have inside, in the center, this normal cosmology of 24-hour days,
Yeah.
but as time dilates away from it, light travels for billions of years in order to reach us.
So Dr. Hartnett's book, Starlight Time and the New Physics, the new physics is his advancement of a very recent advancement of Einstein's relativity. So that's what it's actually a new physics.
And I would like to make this very clear. All these concepts are extremely complicated. I admit that. So I can't just say that, okay, we explain everything. We just gave you an appetizer.
It's
so
a
to speak.
summary on the program.
Whoever
right?
is interested in this should go more profoundly. But keep in mind, this is one of the main arguments used against the scripture.
Right. So really we want to point that out to our viewers here. In Creation Magazine Live, we only have an opportunity to kind of skim the surface of these topics and
Right.
to give some solid answers and
Right.
some solid reasons.
So there are these problems out there, people saying, well, the Bible can't be true because you can't explain how we're seeing light from these galaxies.
Right.
There are several explanations that creation scientists are currently working on, including leading astrophysicists like Dr. Hartnett and Dr. Humphreys. And again, it's an exciting time to be a creationist, especially in astronomy. So, neat stuff.
Creation.com is the world's most powerful internet resource for finding answers to questions about the origins debate. Creation or evolution? When the results are in, which one is supported by scientific observations? Find out at Creation.com. Creation scientists and researchers from around the world have contributed more than 6,500 articles, many of which appeared in leading creationist publications like Creation Magazine and the Journal of Creation over more than 30 years. When news breaks about the latest evolutionary ape man or some major supposed evidence for evolution, check out Creation.com for a Christian creationist response. Each weekend, the website features a feedback article, response to a web visitor's email feedback. Often, the anti-creation arguments in skeptics' emails are refuted in a detailed response by a CMI staff member. So in a very practical way, believers can see that the Bible, and particularly Genesis, can be defended against the skeptics' arguments. The website includes an online store where you can browse through hundreds of the world's leading creationist books, DVDs, and related materials. Got questions? Get answers at Creation.com.
And we're here at the feedback section of the show, and we invite people to ask questions on our website, and we appreciate that, actually. And some of the feedback is positive, and some of the feedback is negative, and some of the feedback is questions. So I thought this would be an appropriate one for the show that we're doing today, because the question from the person was, how can distant starlight reach us in just 6,000 years?
Okay,
and, you know, I know we've just gone over this, but again, we're emphasizing this topic we're discussing today is fairly heady. You might need to do some research if this isn't your thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of, in the Creation Answers book, our most popular book, answers
right.
to more than 60 of the most asked questions. That's one of the most asked questions.
Yeah.
Presto, here it is in a feedback.
That's right.
You've got more complex books like Starlight Time and the New Physics.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're going to get the details here, but it's such a popular question.
Well, what I thought, too, is it kind of encapsulated many of the points that you made, Emil. So anyway, let's just read it here. So this fellow says, God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should change his mind, quoting Numbers 23:19. The above scripture reference summarizes the essential trustworthiness of God. In view of this, if the entire universe, and not just the earth, was created approximately 6,000 years ago, how do you understand such events as, for example, supernova 1987A, in which a star exploded at a distance of approximately 170,000 light years from the solar system? The astronomical distance scale is, of course, not absolute, but there is little basis for believing it to be overestimated by a factor of about 30 at such relatively close distance.
Sure.
Other astronomical observations appear to represent vastly more distant objects, seen therefore at a much earlier epoch. To suggest that the entire observable universe was created with a history of events that has never actually occurred seems to be inconsistent with the character of God described in the Bible. So you can see this Christian's challenge. You know, he wants to know that God is trustworthy, and yet we've got these observable things that are challenging.
Yeah.
And
he's right. We're not suggesting in any of these models that God is using deceptive methods to suggest that there's things going on in this light coming toward us
that haven't happened,
or
right.
are fictitious.
Now, it is interesting, and the first thing I noticed about this, though, and I'm going to read the response in a second, is the fact is, if God is trustworthy, then His Word should be trustworthy, and His Word does seem to indicate 6,000 years.
Yes.
So there's,
yeah.
right? So what's happening here again is this Christian is saying, well, the way I've heard it explained doesn't seem to fit this, so we're going to change what the Bible means. And we really emphasize that with this ministry. We go Bible first, Scripture first, and then we're looking at a way to explain what it says.
And with this topic in particular, as we've talked about, we're looking essentially back in time.
Right.
We're seeing light from these galaxies that are that's tens of millions and sometimes billions of light years old. But I mean, the best history that we have is not making judgments on photons
right.
that we're seeing in our telescopes. It's to have an eyewitness back there in history, and that's what the Bible is, right? So you've got an accurate history. Use that to explain what we're seeing.
Right. So Mark Harwood, one of our speakers in Australia, is answering, and he says he's talking about the reference to, you know, God is not a man that he should lie. And he says, indeed, it is God's trustworthiness that provides the basis for such study and development of science in the first place, and is why science developed in cultures that held a Judeo-Christian worldview. Also, God's trustworthiness provides the basis for our understanding of the of what Scripture says. That is, the belief that it was written to be understood and that God would not deceive or mislead us. The plain meaning of the opening chapters in Genesis can therefore be taken as a historical account of what actually happened during the creation week, the fall, the flood, and the dispersion at the Tower of Babel. Of course, it doesn't follow that statements made by fallible people based on their observations of the physical world are necessarily valid or trustworthy. And you've just pointed out,
exactly.
you know, the fact that, okay, in 1920 this seems to be a valid model, in 1950, and now we're up to, you know, where we are now, and it doesn't seem to be a valid model. But why are we trying to force these things? We've got good ways of explaining the data now from a
The plain
creation.
assumption that knowing more proves more truth is not always the case.
Right.
Because you first need to start with the assumptions. So you might collect knowledge based on certain assumptions, only to discover that later on your assumptions were wrong.
Right.
And for all your knowledge that you gain doesn't explain reality.
Right, it's like building on sand, right?
Exactly.
And the supernova 1987A was observed in 1987, hence the name, and it is generally accepted as being 170,000 light years away. On the surface, it would appear that the light has been traveling for 170,000 years, which is not consistent with a 6,000-year-old universe, but the question is, by which clocks is the time being measured? Of course, this is exactly what you're covering throughout the whole show. And then you also talked about, and Mark does here, it's interesting to note that the Big Bangers have exactly the same problem. You pointed that out. They've got a light time travel problem as well. But at the Q&A times when I'm speaking, I always hear it posed, you know, well, you guys have this big problem, you creationists. You've got this big light time travel problem. And that's the first thing I usually answer with.
The thing is, we've got explanations for that. The Big Bang folks, they don't have a real good one as far as we know of.
Right.
But basically, the models that creationists are talking about is the further away you move from Earth or from the Milky Way, the older things get.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we
You know,
have
but
that.
keep in mind, if God wanted, He could have started the Gospel of John with "In the beginning was relativity." But He didn't do that. He said in the beginning was the Word,
Yes.
and there's where you should go.
Well, I could read more about the feedback here, but I think the point to illustrate is there are answers to these questions, and we shouldn't give up what
Absolutely.
God's Word plainly says because of some objections.